Growing tensions in the Persian Gulf must be reduced. Measuring 3.2 Richter scale rocked Mexico City this
Preparatoria all'organizzazione finale.
international relief efforts for the victims of last week's flooding are proceeding.
Are you having a tornado?
Environmentalists are hopeful that an agreement of 7 nations to stop.
As the world grows smaller every day, more and more what happens one place affects other places.
A report issued today said
I needed to learn how people and places interact. I saw the importance of understanding how the pieces of our world fit together. That's why I set out to discover all I could about geography. At the beginning, it led me to the old photographer. He had spent a lifetime traveling the world, photographing its lands and people. Geography was a subject that fascinated him, one he loved to bring to life. I listened in a dream, carried along by his words, entranced by his pictures.
Let me tell you the story of a geographer. I'm sure you've never heard of him. You won't find him in the history books. All he did, all he saw, all he discovered would have been lost had I not found his journal. Compare our world with his. See how history gives new meaning to his observations. I ask you to keep in mind that all voyages require imagination, and that the greatest voyages may be those that are taken by the imagination.
I set out on a voyage of discovery. What I will find, what I will learn about the world, about myself, I do not know.
So begins the journal of Franklin Shaw. In the mid-1800s, he set out on a voyage to the South Pacific. A cartographer by trade, Shaw was determined to complete the accurate mapping of the many island chains that dot that region.
In one small area of one vast ocean, there are scores of islands, many barely known and poorly mapped. They are full of wonder and mystery. I'm determined to fix the exact position of each island. I want to know with absolute precision the location of these tiny worlds.
But the focus of Shaw's attention changed. As so often happens to explorers, he set out in one direction and found himself heading in another.
As I chart the physical landscape, I also study the natural forces at work. I observe the plants, animals, and people I encounter. I believe now that the geography of an island is as much determined by its life and dynamic processes as by the contour of its coast.
3 years into his voyage, the precise curiosity of the cartographer had evolved into the broader seeking of the geographer. Compelled by his growing fascination for geography, Shaw expanded the scope of his inquiry and set out to explore the world.
It is the white spaces on the maps that fascinate me. The blanks in our knowledge, the regions unknown. How I am drawn to unraveling their mystery. In my inquiry, I am determined to answer 2 essential questions. Why are things located in particular places? And how do these particular places influence our lives?
Shaw ventured to as many of those blank white regions of the maps as he could. He traversed the globe, his quest to understand the world's geography, exposing him to an extraordinary range of environments and cultures.
There are places, primitive and inhospitable, known only to a few adventurous explorers. They seem from another era, from a time when the land was first being shaped by elemental forces. The power of these places is stirring. And it only increases my wonder when, in exploring them, I come across human inhabitants where I'd expected to find none. It's remarkable how people find ways to live in even the most remote and hostile environments. Technology allows us to temper savage worlds, to adapt them to suit our needs. It fuels our growth, lets us explore new frontiers. I can only imagine where it will carry us in the years ahead.
There is a dark side to the human story, a side of conflict and destructiveness that made Shaw wonder if we would ever learn to live in harmony with the land or with ourselves.
We are shapers of the landscape, both for good and for bad. A place is defined by its human characteristics as well as its physical features. And I have learned that people's faces, like the face of the land, reflect the forces that have shaped them.
There must be a bit of the poet in the geographer. Like the artist, the geographer uncovers patterns and themes. Shaw's sensitive spirit enabled him, in his words, to appreciate not just the raw power of this earth, its drama and conflicts, but its subtle harmonies and quiet beauty.
It is a world in motion, a world of change. Rivers of water cutting through the land, eroding it. Streams of people, animals, and goods constantly on the move. Rivers of ideas, finding their course, joining, building. Like the blood flowing through our bodies. Movement sustains the world's life and growth. During my explorations, I've learned to look at maps in a new way. They're not ends in themselves. Maps and charts are the language of geography. If we can read this language, we can begin to understand the story of our world. I see there are many ways of looking at places, many perspectives. I can define a place as a dot on a map, a unique mathematical coordinate on the sphere of the Earth. Or I can step back farther and see the patterns created by many dots. At this level, I see places not as isolated, but as relative to one another. I see them in context. Cities connected by roads, huge areas of farmland, ranges of mountains, nations of people. The traits and features that unite places into regions are many and varied. Like the tiny islands I set out to explore, regions are worlds within a world. From a more distant perspective, I see that regions too are interconnected. I sense a vast web of cause and effect, like a stone thrown into a pond. Everything we do, everything that happens on this planet causes ripples. Ripples that travel out to eventually touch distant shores. We must develop an awareness of the subtle interplay of forces that shape our world and the landscapes of human activity. We must try to understand other peoples and places, see how our cultures are increasingly interdependent. I believe that such an understanding will be the key to our survival, our ability to cope with a changing world. And there is a final perspective, impossible to achieve except in the imagination. I wish we could voyage to the moon or to Mars, stand upon its surface and see the world as a small blue planet in space. The mosaic of distinct places, regions, and cultures existing as one. Perhaps from that perspective, we could fully appreciate this Earth as our home.
The cartographer who had set out to chart the tiniest of islands had developed a perspective on the whole Earth, an island in a much larger sea.
As the photographer finished his story, I reflected upon the journey of Franklin Shaw. My mind was full of questions, so I asked if I might see Shaw's journal. But the photographer said no, that the journal was not the place to look for answers. To understand geography, he said, I must study and explore the world myself. And then I knew. The pages of the journal were blank, like the white spaces on a map. They needed to be filled in. I knew there was no Franklin Shaw. Yet it hardly mattered. Shaw's journey, however fanciful, had created in me a very real fascination for geography. Not a bad legacy for a man whose voyage went no further than the uncharted sea of the imagination.
There will always be white spaces on our maps, places that need more exploration. And at the end of our exploring, we'll arrive back where we started and know the place and perhaps ourselves for the first time.